I travel all over the world, and sometimes I am so surprised by sort of who comes up and says, I grew up on Sesame, I learned English watching Sesame, oh my God, my favorite character, And so, yes, I mean, there are so many people that have a connection. And I have to say, one of my favorite things when we announced the Netflix PBS deal is that someone very senior at Netflix said, my gosh, I've never had more of our employees come up and say, I've never been so proud to work at Netflix. And there'd been a lot of press, like what would happen to Sesame. So there was a sense of like saving Sesame, right?
Uh-huh.
And again, I think a halo comes with that.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to How She Does It, where we connect with extraordinarily talented women who have built impactful lives, and we ask them how they do it. I'm Karen Feinerman. I'm a longtime Wall Street investor, a mom of 4, and a panelist on CNBC's Fast Money. My kids, like yours, or like you when you were a kid, watched Sesame Street, the groundbreaking show featuring Big Bird, Elmo, Abby Cadabby, and many more, is now in its 56th season, and its characters and lessons reach more than 190 countries. Sherrie Westin is just the second woman to be at the helm of Sesame Workshop. The other, of course, being one of its founders, the legendary Joan Gans Cooney. The global nonprofit's mission is to help young children everywhere be smarter, stronger, and kinder. Weston took over as CEO in 2024, and to say she has a lot on her plate would be a massive understatement. There have been a number of challenges, including federal funding cuts, layoffs, and HBO Max opting not to renew a deal to air the show. Sherrie joined me in studio, and we chatted about how she is working to sustain the financial health of Sesame Street, including a new deal with Netflix, what she finds is the key to gaining the trust of others, and some of the really cool perks that exist when you have colleagues like Grover, Oscar the Grouch, the Count, and many more. I loved this conversation. I hope you enjoy. Sherrie Westin, thank you so much for being here. I'm delighted to see you in person.
I am so happy to be here, and I'm so complimented to be asked, so this will be fun.
Okay, it's our pleasure. So you have had a fascinating career, which we'll get to parts of it, but it includes the White House, ABC News, and now Sesame Workshop. So you're CEO since 2024. At the same time, Elmo went viral on social media asking, how's everyone doing? Okay, so Sherrie, how are you doing?
Well, I'm doing, thank you for asking. As Elmo would say, it's important to ask one another how we're doing. I am doing so much better. I mean, I've loved everything I've done at Sesame, but it has also been probably in the last year the most difficult time professionally that I've ever experienced. Having said that, I feel truly grateful to be able to lead through a time like that. It's amazing because prior to coming to Sesame, I had some wonderful experiences, and each one, either 3 or 4 years, you weren't ready to leave, but there was an opportunity. One thing would lead to the other. I couldn't imagine being somewhere more than 20 years. Mm-hmm. But Sesame Workshop is one of the most unique, complicated places. It is so much more than people understand or meet the eye. So over these, 2 decades plus, I never feel like been there, done that. The challenges, the work we've done, the different areas I've led have just always been so fascinating and so rewarding. When Elmo tweeted, how's everyone doing? It was a clever tweet. We do a lot on social media. That's more for older, for fans, but it's also a way to raise awareness around issues. 330 million reactions, engagements with that tweet. Can you imagine? I mean, we never expected that kind of volume, but it was part of our emotional well-being work. Mental health, people think of that as a grown-up issue. No, actually, younger and younger, there are issues around a child's healthy emotional well-being. So the point of that tweet is calling awareness to these issues, to help destigmatize mental health, that it's okay to talk about how you're feeling. And I think in the first week alone, we were able to drive to our emotional well-being resources for parents, for young children, and there were like 17,000 downloads of those resources. So it's not just a clever tweet. It's a wonderful way to highlight an area, a body of work, and a real need for young children and families.
Lots of big names that you've dealt with. How difficult is Elmo to deal with?
Well, Elmo is not difficult. I love working with Elmo.
He would say the same about you, I'm sure.
I've worked with far more difficult talent. But no, I have to say working with the Muppets, and especially those incredibly talented Muppeteers, is one of the absolute highlights of being at Sesame Workshop. Whenever I get out to the studio, it's just so invigorating because you cannot be there without having such appreciation for not just the talent, but the dedication and passion. Everyone that works on that set, they all get why Sesame is so important. They're there for more than the creative outlet. It's the mission. It's what sets us apart. So it's just wonderful to be there. You'd be amazed to watch the Muppeteers. Mm-hmm. So much more goes into it than meets the eye. They're so multi-talented and so versatile that it's just, I'm always in awe. I'm trying to be a backup Muppeteer. I can do Tango, the dog.
I actually still think they're real.
They are.
Yes,
they are.
Yes.
I remember the first time I took my daughter Lily to the actual set, to the studio, and she was about 3.5. And I was a little bit nervous. And when Elmo came over and talked to Lily and gave her a kiss, she said, the real Elmo kissed me. So they're amazing.
So you were able to pivot successfully. I'm sure it was not easy. The HBO Max deal has changed.
Yes.
And you're at Netflix now, as well as
still on PBS. It's so important. We announced the Netflix deal as a public-private partnership because it was Netflix and PBS. And I'm very grateful to Netflix for that they were so open to that being a public-private partnership. And now PBS receives the same episodes, same day, same date. So that's really important to us. I mean, Netflix allows us to have a reach of 190 countries, 330 million homes, 30 plus languages, which is fantastic for our mission, for our reach. PBS is so important to reach every child in America. We don't want to be reaching only children who can afford a streaming service. Part of Sesame's DNA is being on public broadcasting and being there for all children domestically. And then we're also partners with YouTube, which is also an incredibly important platform and allows us tremendous global reach. And that's where we have the largest library of Sesame Street content is on YouTube. And of course, a lot of short form.
So I can't help but wonder, when you seek these deals, you're looking to negotiate with these different parties. Are you always across the table from someone who feels like they have a connection to Sesame Street? Well,
that's the beauty of Sesame Street. I have to say, I travel all over the world, and sometimes I am so surprised by sort of who comes up and says, I grew up on Sesame. I learned English watching Sesame. Oh my God, my favorite character, And so, yes, I mean, there are so many people that have a connection. And I have to say, one of my favorite things when we announced the Netflix PBS deal is that someone very senior at Netflix said, my gosh, I've never had more of our employees come up and say, I've never been so proud to work at Netflix. Because there is this halo. Plus, I think there was a lot of people were really pleased that it was Netflix and PBS. And there had been a lot of press, like what would happen to Sesame. So there was a sense of like saving Sesame, right? And again, I think a halo comes with that. I don't take that personally that we're no longer on HBO. We have a great relationship with them. We still have a library deal, but children's programming was not their priority. I don't blame them. That was not part of their strategic planning. And in all honesty, would not be the best place for new seasons of Sesame. So this worked out for the best. It's very different economically, in large part just because the media landscape economics have changed. So while it's fantastic for us, we still have a large budget, deficit that we have to really work hard to raise more money from philanthropic support. We have to involve licensing, distribution fees, and philanthropic support still make up our revenue. It's just the percentages changed significantly. And we were just fortunate that 50% of our revenue was from distribution fees. And that world has changed. So that allowed me for many, many years to cover all of our operating expenses and then go raise philanthropic funding for these incredible
How important is that philanthropic funding?
Well, today it's more important than ever because I can't just raise money for projects or countries or certain targeted programs, we no longer have that unrestricted revenue that covers the operating expense. So the challenge today is really to help people understand that we need their support to sustain Sesame's work. And I firmly believe the need for Sesame has never been greater.
And how about the federal aid cut? Was that a surprise?
I will tell you, there have been many a times when public broadcasting funding has been at risk. That's not as large a portion of our budget. It's so important to us because it's so important for America and for children. So even if it's not a huge hit to us financially, it's so important. Less than 4% of our entire budget is from federal funding. So those cuts were not existential to Sesame. Mm-hmm. But what surprised me were the USAID cuts. And while that may only be 4% of our overall budget, in a country like Bangladesh, USAID funding was 100%. That I did not anticipate. That was really hard. Mm-hmm. And it meant we could no longer do the work we were doing in Iraq, in Bangladesh. Mm-hmm. Much of our work in India is funded by USAID. You know, a lot of people don't understand sort of the reach of Sesame or the impact. But if you take a country like Bangladesh, we've been there 20 years. Sisimpur is the local adaptation of Sesame Street with local Bangladeshi characters. And I've traveled to Bangladesh many times. If I said Sisimpur in an airport, children would start singing. It's like Sesame Street here, right? So that's pretty heartbreaking to have to eliminate that work.
I didn't realize the breadth, actually, of Sesame Street until we started working on this interview. The ones you mentioned, also Syria. Were you in Bosnia at one time?
Listen, over the years, we've had so many incredible, we used to call them co-productions, but it's adaptations. You would recognize it. You go, oh my God, that's Sesame, but it's in their language. There would be, for instance, Syria. Alam Simsim means welcome Sesame. We created that specifically to reach children throughout the Middle East, the Levant region, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq. We did it in response to the Syrian crisis because there were so many children who had to leave. At the time, it was the largest number of children displaced since World War II. And we had all of this Arabic content because we had done local productions in Jordan, in Egypt. And you'll see Elmo. You'll see characters you recognize. But because you're creating it for a specific audience with a specific sort of curricular goal and objective, we created Jod. Jod had to leave his home. He becomes best friends with Basma. So you see, you're creating new characters and storylines only when you think there's a reason that would help children identify. We're not going to say Jod's the refugee Muppet, but there are going to be storylines and opportunities to model and to illustrate things that children will really relate to. You know, so that's been incredible work over the years.
Yeah, that seems like on a whole other level, and yet you do it through these characters that are.
Yeah, it's so powerful. I think we're a victim of our own success. Sesame Street in the U.S. is so iconic. You know, been here 56 years, that people think of Sesame Street as a U.S. television show. That's why, you know, they often don't realize the depth and breadth. When Joan created Sesame Street, even she said she thought she was creating the quintessential American show. It's on a stoop in Harlem, the first multiracial cast, right?
The forward-thinkingness of it is extraordinary.
She's incredibly prescient. But within a year, Germany, Mexico, and Brazil reached out and said, we want our own local productions. And that's what led to our local adaptations of Sesame via Sesamo in Brazil, Plaza Sesamo in Mexico, Sesame Street in Germany, you know. So, and if you grow up in Germany, you think Bert and Ernie are Germany. You know, Sesame Street is 55 years old, I think, and so, or 50 years old. So it's, you know, they don't even really believe there's one in the U.S.
I like to believe that's where it all started. It's amazing how strongly people feel about them. So going back, just you and your career, did you have aspirations of becoming the CEO?
Since I've been at Sesame?
Yes.
I mean, listen, I've been there. When I started, Lily was 3.5. I've since had my son. When my children were young, I had so much to do, and I didn't have aspirations that I needed to be CEO. And then in more recent years, you know, there would be often times where people would say, this should be the next step. I just always had roles that were very significant and I thought suited my strengths ideally. So No, I haven't always wanted to be. In fact, there are many times where I was saying I don't want to be CEO. If you ask me honestly, as a woman, was that I just know myself so well and I didn't want to be dealing with the contracts and the things I wanted to be focused on, the programming or the social impact? I think that is part of it. If you said, are you sure it wasn't imposter syndrome? I'd be hard pressed to say it may have been part of it too. You know, when people ask you, if you knew you would just knock it out of the park and succeed, would you have done this earlier? Maybe. But it all worked out where this was the right time, perhaps the hardest. But I feel like I was meant to be leading Sesame Workshop at this point in time. Now, I'll confess that when I took it on, I knew it was going to be the hardest year. And part of it was I thought, gosh, I'm always thinking I can't do any more than I already do. I've always worked so hard. And it's always been so time-consuming in every role at Sesame. But it kind of dawned on me, if someone else came in from the outside, it wouldn't be any less work. It might even be more stress to be trying to make sure that they understood the ethos and the mission and I just thought, no, it's time to step up. And the board gave me that opportunity, for which I'm very grateful. The beginning of that period, I felt a bit like, I have no choice. I have to do this, but it will be hell. And so a little bit put upon, but I have to do it. I will say in the last year, I've evolved to where, no, I am so privileged to lead this organization. I am so proud of what we've come through. And I have just a huge sense of gratitude. So I have a much better attitude.
I feel like what you described, no, it's on me, I have to do this, is sounding like the mother. I'm the mother here of Sesame Street. This is a really hard job.
I think I never felt more needed. And I think it took that for me to say, how can I say no? Because I stepped into the role as interim saying, I don't want to be CEO, but I'll be interim until you find someone. I mean, I was that much like, no. And then I thought, what am I? I felt so empowered to step in when I was empowered to lead.
Would the idea of seeing someone else in the CEO role seem like?
That's why I sort of said, wait a minute, what am I thinking? Yeah. It was an evolution, but I'm proud and pleased. And again, it has been a really difficult year. And it's not like there won't be more challenges. There are still so many challenges. But I am, again, so proud of the team, the organization, myself. And for me to say that, like, yeah, I'm proud of myself too.
Good.
Yeah.
You should be. Looking back on this difficult period, is there anything you would have done differently?
Sure, hindsight is always 20/20, right? But not really. I think we handled it. It was a bit of a perfect storm. We knew with the media landscape changing that we were going to have to right-size the organization. That is so hard, especially when you've been somewhere as long as I have. You know, to do any sort of downsizing is really painful, but I knew it was necessary for the organization to sustain our work. The most important thing is Sesame going to be here for the next generation of children? And I take that responsibility very seriously. As I mentioned, the USAID cuts, I didn't expect that at the same time. We also didn't have a Netflix deal yet. We knew we were coming off Warner, so there was huge pressure to figure out what is that new home for Sesame. So it was a lot. And it's a very challenging environment in which to work today, and that's for any organization, and particularly leading a nonprofit organization. There is so much polarization, there's so much more uncertainty, and that's something we grapple with every day. Maybe there are little things you found that this didn't work as well as that, so you're pivoting again. But I think that's the nature of leading, and I think, we pride ourselves on experiment. We learn, whether it's the season, whether we're delivering on the curriculum, we learn, we test, we do research, we learn from our mistakes. And I feel the same way in leading the organization. Okay,
so the perks of being the CEO of Sesame Street, are there any pinch me moments where you're just like, wow, this is fun?
Listen, I think whenever you're with our talented Muppeteers, being on set, it's really special. I remember being on set with Billie Jean King, and she, I had seen her at something else, and she'd said, one of my bucket list dreams was to be on Sesame Street. I've never been on Sesame Street. And I was like, well, I know someone, I might be able to help here. And so we booked Billie Jean King, and I don't know how she'd never been on Sesame Street, but I made sure to go to the set the day she was
Of course.
Of course. And the whole crew it's like I was a hero, not to her for bringing her on, but to the entire crew that just were like in awe and so grateful. And she was so great. She introduced herself to every single person. And then at one point they were all applauding. And those are moments that are really special, really iconic. And you're just reminded again of the magic of Sesame, the purpose of Sesame. So there are a lot of those moments.
I'll bet. One time I saw Frances McDormand somewhere, and I had just watched Big Bird Gets Lost in the ABC Mart the night before with my kids. And she worked in the ABC Mart in this video. And I went up to her and I said, I got to tell you, I loved you in Big Bird Gets Lost in ABC Mart. And she said, thank you. It's some of my finest work.
I love that. I talked to so many people who've been on Sesame Street who it's just like the highlight. And people often said when they were invited to be on Sesame Street, they knew they'd arrived, right? Another one of the visits that I just loved was Brett Goldstein. And it was soon after the success of Ted Lasso. And of course, if you know, he plays Roy Kent, right?
Yeah, Roy Kent.
And I thought we were very clever because we had him on, and the word of the day was a 4-letter word that started with F. Seemed very appropriate. It was fair. It was fair. But he's often said in his stand-up routine sense that it was the best day of his life.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm Madeline Kahn and Julia Roberts. It's so crazy how amazing people you've had. So,
but listen, that's another interesting thing to me about the Joan Gantz Cooney's prescience. There's educators, there's creatives, and there's researchers. And they're all equally important in the creation of Sesame. But she had a hunch the learning would be deeper if an adult were watching with a child, that the learning could carry on off screen. Mm-hmm. And that's why there were celebrities and musicians and humor and parodies. And I think that it's Sesame's sort of secret sauce. It's why it appeals to all ages. It's why we've been able to have the impact we have. And so most people don't understand that was a very deliberate attempt to engage adults as well as children.
I love how smart that was and is. So your kids are grown.
Yes.
Lily is 31 and
gosh, I think Lily's 30. No, you're right. She's 31.
It's my producer, I think. Yeah, she knows everything.
And David Palmer is 23.
Okay.
I want to keep him as young as possible.
So when she was younger, what was her opinion of your job at Sesame Street?
Oh, you're a rock star when you have preschoolers and your mom works at Sesame Street, right, until they outgrow it. But I'll never forget the very first day. Lily knew I was going to work at Sesame Street. I called home before I left and said I was on my way home. And she said, were they nice to you? And I said, yeah, sure. And she goes, which one was the nicest? And I realized, oh my God, she's asking about the characters. You know, she thinks like Cookie Monster's in the office next door. It was so sweet.
Doing his office work.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
How about your son? Did he like it too?
Oh, of course. I mean, I brought them to the office a lot, obviously. And, they outgrow, all children outgrow Sesame. I remember when Lily was about maybe 5.5, maybe 6, but I think it was like 5.5. And she said, Mama, Susanna doesn't like where you work. And I said, well, you mean Susanna doesn't like Sesame Street? And she said, right. And I said, well, that's okay. Susanna's your older friend. She's 8. And, children outgrow Sesame Street. And she said, doesn't that hurt your feelings? And I said, no. And she said, are you sure? And I said, yes. And she said, oh, good, because there's something I've been wanting to tell you. Which I just love the empathy, right? Like she had outgrown Sesame Street, but she was afraid to tell me.
Well, she clearly absorbed all of that.
Yes.
Oh, that's so good. So you grew up in Virginia in what I had heard described as an Ozzie and Harriet kind of
Well, you don't know. You don't know that when you're growing up.
Yes,
but
you don't.
But looking back, I do think I had a wonderful parents, younger brothers, grew up in an apple orchard with great neighbors with all sorts of children the same age. And, so it was my mother was the most fun, like everybody's favorite mom. So I do think I had a very blessed childhood. There were a lot of things I wasn't exposed to until I went to college and went away. But I had a very healthy sort of unconditional love and childhood that I very much appreciate.
So your mom, stay-at-home mom, mm-hmm. She's 91 now.
Yes. She's still in Virginia.
What did you learn from your mother?
Well, as I said, my mom was everyone's favorite mom. Everybody wanted to come to my house. And she was so young when she had me. I mean, she was 23. And, I can't even fathom that now. I mean, I was much older when I had children. But, so if we were in the top of the apple tree, so was my mom. So she's always just had such a great sort of spirit and determination. But I think there were times when she would be proud of me for my career and slightly envious and would say, well, if I had grown up in a different era, I think I could have too. Well, of course she could have. Right. But I often thought she was actually fortunate that she grew up in the time she did where she loved being a mom. And we had the most elaborate birthday parties, which was constantly like coming up with events. Let's have a mother-daughter Easter fashion show. What? And she'd build a little runway and have all the neighborhood moms come over and make us little outfits. I mean, she just was always looking for ways to enjoy her children and to include others. And, I actually think that as a mother with young children growing up outside of New York, we also had a really wonderful neighborhood and a lot of traditions that probably I got from my mom.
Mm-hmm. So I know you have a new book coming out.
Yes.
About moms. So tell us about it.
Jeff Dunn was CEO of Sesame Workshop for many years, once removed from me. And I loved him, admire him, still do. And when he stepped down, he said, Sherrie, I have one favor. I want you to help me with my passion project. And he said, I want to write a book about moms and their influence on really accomplished, interesting people. And I was thinking, I have no more time to do that. But we talked about, could we make it benefit Sesame Workshop so I could rationalize helping? And he, of course, totally agreed. And so it's taken us several years between mine distractions and his, but we just started interviewing various people. It's such an eclectic list about their moms. And it's called What I Learned from Mom. It will be out in April of this year in time for Mother's Day. I hope it'll be a nice Mother's Day gift. And most important, that all of our proceeds will go to Sesame Workshop.
Let me ask a question about you as a mother, and we ask a lot of the women. Going back a little bit before you were the CEO of Sesame, but when we first got there, you were married to David Westin.
Yes.
You had Lily. He has children from his previous marriage. So David, you have together. This is a busy household with two executives. How did you make that work?
It's definitely yours, mine, and ours. He had children before. Lily, I had adopted before David and I were married. Mm-hmm. And then we had our child together, David Palmer, my son, about 7 years later. Largely because, to your point, David was like, Lily should not be an only child. She lobbied for a sibling constantly. And he said, but it will be hell. And that's why we had our son. But it wasn't hell, so that's good. But yes, it was a lot. And he, running ABC News for almost 15 years, that's a very demanding role. As I said, I've always worked so hard, and Sesame has always been more demanding than one would think. But Sesame is also a place that cares deeply about families and children. You would expect it to. So no one ever batted an eye when I was sort of beginning my career at Sesame and throughout, that you would always take the time you need to be at every, school event or to leave early to attend a game. And so I was really grateful for that. It's a great place to grow up as a young mother or to raise children. And again, as you said, there are some perks to bring your children to Sesame Street.
Okay, so in your varied career, which is really long and interesting, you worked for Jack Kemp at HUD. You worked for President George H.W. Bush, 41. What did you take away from those experiences?
Working for President 41 was such an honor. I was, I think, one of the youngest assistants to the president, one of only two women. So a huge privilege, a huge learning opportunity. I think it probably just taught me so much about the importance of integrity and character and a clear North Star in a leader to inspire others. I was in the White House. It was 1992, the last year of the Bush 41 administration, which was a very challenging time if you think back on it. But I do think that what I really take away was how important a leader's character is, their intention, even when things weren't maybe what you had hoped and there was an awful lot of challenges. I never doubted President Bush's character or his intention to do the right thing. I think one of the things I also find is the importance of optimism and the importance of really believing we can do this. And I think you want an optimistic leader, whether it's the best of times or the worst of times.
Mm-hmm. I love that. So you also did 2 stints at ABC News.
One at ABC News, and then I came back to ABC Network.
This was circa the Walters, Jennings, Sawyer era. So between
the Magnificent Seven, I think we called them. When I first went to ABC News, Roone Arledge was president. And I remember this photo shoot of like Diane and Barbara and Peter and Ted. And yes, it was called the Magnificent Seven.
When you look at those names, Walters and Jennings and Sawyer, this is a person to trust. How do you gain trust?
That's such an interesting question, because I certainly wouldn't compare myself to them. For me, I think it's just about authenticity. I mean, people are not going to all agree with me. The staff is not always going to agree with me. But I do hope that they know that my intentions are honorable, that I'm always trying to do what I believe is the best thing for the organization. And I also tried to make sure that people feel heard, even if I go in a different direction. I think that's also so important in leadership. I cannot try to please everyone. I'm very self-aware. And I think that's important in a leader, because I know my strengths. I also know my weaknesses. And I want to bring people in who are so much stronger than I am on certain skills or certain areas. And I'm absolutely willing to delegate.
So looking back at your very interesting career, you've been in media, you've been in government. Is there a thread there?
Well, it certainly doesn't. It's not a straight path, right? And there's certainly no grand plan. Often when I will speak at universities about, like, to students and graduating, and I'll say, look, there are 2 different ways you can go. Katie Couric was a classmate, well, she was a year ahead of me. I'll be sure and say that. But she was at UVA when I was, and we were close. And Katie knew what she wanted to do from the moment I met her. And so everything she did was, I'm going to work in journalism. I'm going to take these courses. I'm going to intern here. And she's a great example of someone who set a path and did everything. And look how successful she's been. So I would tell students, there's that. So if you know what you want to do, just do anything and everything to get there. Then there's me, who had no idea what I wanted to do when I left college. And that's okay too. Be really open to experiences, to interviews. Even if you learn you hate something, that was really valuable. So I don't think I set out with a very clear path of exactly what I wanted to do. But I will say that each thing led me to something else. I think they all were purpose-driven, and that's what appealed to me about each of those jobs. And I will say that one of the things that I don't think I understood how valuable it was until years later. I remember being offered a pretty big job. And as usual, I would say, I'm not sure I'm as qualified as everyone else. Like, why would you say that? But, you know, it's very female, I think.
Yeah.
And they were like, no, Sherrie, you have... What many don't is that you have experience in so many different areas. You understand government. You understand media. You've worked in these various areas, which brings to your perspective a lot broader experience. And I thought to myself for the first time, wow, that is true. And I certainly didn't do that deliberately, but it's a huge advantage. And even today, at Sesame Workshop as CEO, I draw upon my experience in Washington as much as I do my experience at ABC. So even though they probably hired me because I was coming from television, you're learning things you don't even realize you're learning when you're exposed to a different industry or a different branch of government or just sector, a different sector.
Okay, Sherrie, it's time for a lightning round.
Good. I've been looking forward to this.
All right, we have some fun questions for you. If you would you rather, just all we ask is this: first thing that pops into your head.
Okay.
All right. Would you rather play tennis or watch tennis?
Play tennis.
Okay.
But I wish I'd play it really well, especially if I could play it really well.
Would you rather make magic with Abby or eat cookies with Cookie Monster?
Well, that's so unfair. That's a little bit like asking your favorite child, but I'm trying to lose weight. I'd rather make magic with Abby.
Okay. We know Elmo really loves to giggle. What is the last thing that made you laugh?
The last thing that made me laugh was my son, who has a wonderful sense of humor, and both my children do, but that great sort of dry sense of irony, which I love.
Okay, do you have a hidden talent?
Hidden talent. I can do a great imitation of Tango, the Muppet which is what I'm saying. If everything else fails, I feel I could be an understudy.
Okay, just good to know, just to have that in your back pocket. Would you rather take a road trip with Big Bird or Oscar the Grouch?
Well, Big Bird. I love Oscar, but I would rather be with Big Bird to have a more positive outlook.
Okay. What is your best Barbara Walters memory?
Oh, I have so many Barbara Walters memories. But Barbara gave me a gift once as a surprise for my 50th birthday. And it was something that she had been given, and I used to always admire it. And I used to always tease her, saying, when she dies, I hope she would pass those on to me. And so on my 50th birthday, she decided, I don't think I should wait till I die. I've always admired these, and they were really a special gift. So I think that just showed her incredible generosity.
Okay, that is a good answer. What books are on your nightstand or your Kindle?
Oh my God, there's so many books. It nags me because I'm always have the next book that I'm dying to read. I read it a lot, and I've gotten to where I listen to Audible a lot. So I just finished The Correspondent, which is fiction, which I loved. I also am reading Mattering, written by Jennifer Wallace, which I think is fantastic. It's just about the importance of letting others know how much they matter. It's the importance of not only feeling valued, but adding value. And it's all sorts of just different vignettes of examples. And it's quite lovely. And, on one hand, you're like, of course, that's intuitive. But it's just such a wonderful reminder of how important it is for us to let one another know how much they matter and how our actions so much signal, that you matter. So I love that book. I read a lot of history. I just finished 1929, Andrew Ross Sorkin's book, which was a long but really great.
Yes.
It made me want to go back and read Too Big to Fail, which I actually listened to, which is also such a great book, right?
Yes.
So there's always so much on my nightstand, and I go back and forth between reading books on leadership and things where I think I'll really learn something, and reading books for complete pleasure.
We hear you are fantastic at sending cards and thank you notes. What is a memorable thank you note that you've received?
Well, President Bush, 41, was prolific and known for writing people nonstop. I remember once I sent him a photo of him with his granddaughter, Marshall Bush, who is the daughter of Marvin and Margaret Bush, who were dear friends, and we went to UVA together. And he sent me a note back thanking me for sending this photo. And his note was so sweet that I wrote him back to thank him for his note. And then he wrote me back to thank me for my thank you note. And I remember someone saying, one of you is going to have to stop. that was a pretty special thank you note.
Okay, the last one, in 2 parts. What is the best investment you've ever made and the worst investment you've ever made?
The best investment I've ever made is my children. Any time with them is so special. I feel so fortunate. I have one adopted child, one biological child. Lily is from China. David Palmer, I had about 7 years after Lily. It's such a great lesson in parenting. Like, he's no more my son than she's my daughter. And I do think becoming Lily's mom was the defining moment of my life. I still, to this day, becoming a mom and becoming Lily's mom changed everything. But my worst investment is probably the dozens of things I've ordered off of Instagram thinking that, oh my God, I can't live without that. And then I get them and I don't even know what they are. I can't figure out what is this device, right? So that's a very bad investment that I tend to make.
All right. Sherrie, thank you so much for spending the time with us.
This was a treat, and I really enjoyed being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking time to listen to our conversation on how she does it. Wishing you all a week filled with sunny days. We'll have another great conversation for you soon. Until then, onward.